At the family dinner, they called me poor, then my assistant called. My name is Camila Alves. I'm 38 years old and the founder of TerraVale, a quiet but profitable sustainability consultancy based in San Diego. We work with companies who are serious about transforming their environmental footprint without relying on marketing gimmicks or performative change. I built it from scratch over 12 years, brick by brick, client by client, often working from coffee shops and shared spaces long after others gave up. This past fiscal year, we crossed 30 million in revenue, partnered with 3 international firms, and helped redirect over 60,000 metric tons of potential waste. But unless you read the fine print on a CSR report or attend closed-door climate forums, you probably wouldn't know. And that's exactly how I've preferred it. I don't drive a luxury car. I live in a mid-century home. I renovated myself. My clothes are sustainable, often secondhand, not because I can't afford more, but because I've made a conscious decision to align my life with my work. It's a decision that confuses people, especially my family. Tonight was my parents' annual Thanksgiving dinner, held in their ocean view villa in La Jolla, where image has always outweighed substance. My mother, a retired cosmetic dentist, still wears heels and fresh Chanel to serve turkey. My father, a former commercial developer, talks louder when name-dropping people with yachts. My younger brother, Raphael, freshly returned from Manhattan with a new girlfriend and a new Rolex, pulled up in his third lease sports car. Me, I parked my hybrid behind the catering van and entered through the front like I always do, holding a homemade tart and wearing flats, as usual. Nobody asked how I was doing. Not really. I sat through 2 hours of small talk peppered with loaded questions. Raphael's girlfriend, Brielle, asked me if I was still consulting or doing something new yet. My uncle offered to connect me with a friend in HR in case things ever slow down. And when I quietly mentioned I'd just come back from a client summit in Toronto, my cousin Mateo smirked and said, Airbnb or budget hotel. The table laughed, even my mother. No one asked about the summit itself or the keynote I delivered in front of 200 executives. No one seemed interested in the fact that I'd just helped a company cut their emissions by 40%. To them, that wasn't success. Not in a linen blouse and flat shoes, not without a designer tag or a 6-figure ring. The breaking point came just as dessert was being served. Mateo stood up with a glass of wine in hand and announced, "Let's toast to Camila for keeping it real. Poor Chic is so in this year." The table chuckled like it was a joke worth repeating. I smiled politely, said nothing, and reached for the water. I've lived through years of this, of being underestimated, overlooked, quietly dismissed as the one who couldn't keep up. I've watched my family reward flash over depth, connections over ethics, status over contribution. I've told myself again and again that I didn't need them to understand my choices. But in that moment, something shifted. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was my assistant, Taylor. She doesn't call during dinner unless it's important. I picked up and answered on speaker without thinking. Her voice rang out clearly across the table. "Hi, Camila. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I just got confirmation. The legal team finished drafting the acquisition paperwork, and we're set for signature first thing Monday. The Patagonia transfer came through as well, and the Geneva Summit finalized your panel for February. Also, Everglow's chief sustainability officer reached out about that dinner you mentioned. They're interested in a 6-month advisory contract and would like to hear your thoughts before drafting terms." There was silence. Forks hovered midair. Brielle froze, eyes wide. My father's jaw tightened. Mateo blinked twice. Taylor didn't know she was on speaker, but I let her finish. I answered calmly, "Thanks. Taylor, please let Geneva know I'm confirming. I'll review the acquisition docs tonight and send edits before noon. I ended the call, set the phone down, and looked up. No one said a word, not even Raphael. For the first time in my life, my family didn't have something clever to say, and I realized I didn't need their validation. I never did. I'd been building something real while they'd been building performances. You want to know what happened after that? Before that call shattered the performance of the evening, before my name made anyone at that table sit up with real attention, there was a long road paved with small humiliations, strategic silences, and a quiet belief that I might eventually be seen for who I really am. I was born and raised in the very house where that dinner took place, a stuccoed cliffside villa that always felt colder than the Pacific wind, despite the marble floors and heated walls. My mother, Elena, had a gift for making people feel judged with a single glance. Every time I came home from school with paint on my jeans or dirt under my nails from the school garden, she would clench her jaw and remind me that appearances mattered. My father, Ricardo, was louder about it. He believed money talked, and that people who couldn't prove their worth in the first 5 minutes weren't worth listening to. It was a philosophy that made him rich and emotionally bankrupt at the same time. My brother Raphael was their favorite from the start. He was everything they wanted: smart, charming, ambitious, and ruthless. By high school, he was already doing internships at his godfather's investment firm. By college, he was trading crypto out of a dorm room and bragging about it to family friends. I was quieter. I spent weekends sketching, volunteering at beach cleanups, and eventually started studying environmental policy at UC Santa Barbara. When I told my father about my major, he stared at me like I had announced a terminal illness. He asked if I planned to live off donations or just marry a professor. My mother asked if I could at least double major in something more practical, like communications. No one came to my capstone presentation. No one asked what I cared about, but I kept going. After graduation, I worked in a nonprofit for 2 years, living in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. I took the trolley to work, bought groceries in bulk, and started building a network of contacts who actually believed in impact, not just image. I didn't go to family events for a while. Every visit came with veiled insults wrapped in politeness. Once, at a baby shower, my aunt asked if I was still working for free or if I'd finally decided to get a real job. Raphael would send screenshots of his bank balance into the family group chat, and no one said a word. The same group chat where my parents ignored every article I shared about TerraVale's early partnerships or environmental grants. They didn't read anything that didn't come from a glossy business magazine or a luxury real estate listing. When I started TerraVale, I had less than $6,000 in savings and one part-time assistant who worked unpaid hours for school credit. I worked 12-hour days consulting for small restaurants, boutique retailers, even dental offices that wanted to reduce waste. It was never sexy work. No one took photos of our results, but we measured change in every compost bin installed, every supply chain we helped decarbonize, when we hit our first $1 million in revenue. I bought myself a used hybrid SUV and gave my assistant her first full-time paycheck. When we hit $10 million, I took the team to a cabin retreat and built a compost garden in the backyard. I didn't post any of it, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need applause. I needed purpose, and I had it. The few times I did show up at family events, I always kept my answers vague. I knew better than to engage. One time, at a Christmas dinner, Raphael's fiancée asked if I wanted to borrow a dress for New Year's since your minimalist thing is so brave. Another time, my uncle offered to connect me with a job at a beverage distributor because they need someone earthy like you to do eco stuff on their labels. I smiled, declined, and changed the subject. Not once did I ask for anything. Not money, not connections, not even basic interest. So when I answered Taylor's call at the dinner table, I wasn't doing it to prove anything. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need validation. I picked up that phone because I've spent years building something with substance while being told, over and over again, that I didn't belong at the same table. But the numbers didn't lie. The partnerships didn't lie. The impact didn't lie. That call wasn't the start of something. It was the first time my family saw what had been true all along. The hours that followed that phone call moved in strange, quiet beats. No one said anything for a while. And when the conversation finally resumed, it tiptoed awkwardly around me like I had suddenly become unfamiliar terrain. Raphael picked up a bottle of wine and began pouring with more energy than necessary, pretending to talk about vineyard ownership, while Brielle leaned into her phone screen like she was researching something important. My mother asked if someone wanted more turkey even though everyone's plates were full, and my father reached for the salt with a new tightness in his jaw, as if that tiny ceramic shaker could anchor the room. I stayed in my chair, calm, steady. I wasn't angry, and I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt exposed, but not in a bad way. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding what I had built just to make other people comfortable, and in that silence, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't just ignorance that kept them from asking about my work. It was the assumption that someone like me, someone who didn't chase the symbols they chased, couldn't possibly be building something worth noticing. That realization didn't hurt anymore. It clarified everything. After dessert, the guests began to disperse into familiar clusters. The women moved to the living room with coffee and gossip, while the men drifted toward the backyard to discuss market trends and property speculation. I stood quietly in the hallway near the front door, wondering how long I should wait before leaving without making a scene. That's when Grandma Teresa approached. She was the only person in the family who had never once questioned my choices. At 81, she had long since stopped trying to impress anyone and lived in a small house with 3 lemon trees and a shelf of mystery novels she reread each spring. She looked at me for a long moment, eyes sharper than anyone gave her credit for, then said softly, "They don't know what to do with you because you didn't ask them for anything. You made your own table." Her words hit somewhere deep, not painful, just honest. I nodded and she added, "That was some phone call. Mija, you should visit more often, or maybe not." She smiled, then turned to shuffle toward the kitchen, leaving me stunned with quiet respect. The car ride home was equally quiet, but my mind wasn't. I kept replaying Taylor's voice through the speaker, not because of what it revealed to the room, but because of what it confirmed to me. I hadn't just built a company, I'd built integrity, real, lived values, and while my family passed judgment from dinnerware and car keys, I had employees who felt seen, clients who valued transformation over optics, and a growing group of young environmentalists who emailed me asking how to follow this path. I wasn't living small, I was living aligned, and that difference meant everything. The next morning, I woke up to 3 unread texts, one from Raphael, asking if I wanted to meet for coffee to talk investments, one from my mother, casually asking for a link to the shoes I wore, followed by a second message correcting herself and asking if I was okay with that kind of brand, and one from Mateo with a meme of a luxury watch and the words, "Your next move," followed by a winking emoji. None of them said anything about the call, but every message was a response to it. I didn't answer, not because I wanted revenge, but because the energy I spent defending my choices could now go somewhere better, into my work, into myself, into the things that actually grew. That week, I called a meeting with my executive team and proposed something I'd been holding back on for months. I wanted to create a mentorship arm inside TerraVale, a real platform for overlooked students and first-generation professionals in environmental consulting. I'd grown tired of industry rooms that all looked the same. I told my team I wanted more diversity, not just in image, but in thought, experience, and life background. Everyone agreed instantly. Taylor offered to start outlining the framework that afternoon. No one asked what it would look like in the press. No one mentioned sponsorships or brand strategy. They just asked how soon we could begin. That's when I knew I was in the right room. Somewhere between that awkward dinner and the vision meeting that followed, I stopped thinking about my family as something I needed to convince. They were who they had always been, but I had finally changed, and the only approval I needed now was my own. 3 days after the dinner, I was back in the office, reviewing proposals and finalizing the onboarding plan for 2 new clients, when Taylor knocked gently on the door, holding an envelope with an amused look on her face. It was an invitation, hand-delivered, gold-trimmed, addressed formally to Ms. Camila Alves. I opened it, half expecting another local sustainability gala or greenwashing seminar wrapped in buzzwords. Instead, it was a brunch invitation from my mother. No details, no agenda, just the date, time, and location, the garden patio at her club, a place she swore I'd never be comfortable in because those kinds of places require polish. I stared at the card for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or throw it out. It was unusual in our family. We didn't do apologies. We did silence, distance, and forced smiles. This felt like the first breadcrumb of a new script, and I wasn't sure I wanted to read it. That Saturday, I went not out of obligation, but curiosity. I wore what I always wear, simple, well-fitted, nothing loud. The club staff didn't blink. I was seated before I could ask. My mother arrived 7 minutes late, as always, her perfume arriving before she did. She sat down with practiced grace, ordered an espresso, and opened her menu without looking at me. I didn't speak first. After a few quiet minutes, she said, "I Googled you, your company." I raised an eyebrow. She continued, "I didn't know you had offices in 4 cities, or that Patagonia listed you on their climate impact page." I nodded once. She looked up. "Why didn't you ever tell us I took a sip of my tea?" I did. "You just didn't listen. Or you changed the subject before I could finish." She didn't argue, just stared into her cup like it held the answer to decades of misunderstanding. After a pause, she said, "It's impressive, what you've built. Your father, well, he doesn't say much, but he reads everything now. Even printed out that article from Stanford about your urban initiative." I let her words settle without reaching for them. It wasn't validation. It wasn't even a proper acknowledgement, but it was new, and new, in my family, was rare. She eventually asked about my next steps, and for once, I answered directly. I told her about the mentorship program we'd launched, about the funding we were allocating toward Native-led environmental groups. I told her that success, for me, was never about accumulating but redistributing opportunity. She nodded slowly, said it wasn't what she expected. Then she added, "I used to think success had to be visible to be real. Maybe that was wrong. It wasn't a confession, but it was as close as she'd ever get to one. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but when we left the table, I didn't feel like a child trying to earn a seat anymore. I felt like a woman holding her own ground, no longer needing permission to exist differently, The next week, Raphael sent me an email, not a group message, not a meme, a real email, subject line lunch. The body was short, said he wanted to hear more about my work, said he was thinking about ESG investments and wasn't sure where to start. I didn't trust the timing, but I agreed to meet. We sat at a cafe in downtown La Jolla, and for the first time in years, he didn't talk over me. He asked real questions, took notes, seemed genuinely interested, but somewhere between his curiosity and my cautious openness, I realized something else. He didn't really want to understand what I did. He wanted to borrow credibility, add a line to a portfolio. He said things like, "You'd be the perfect face for a green fund, and we should pitch something together at the next conference in Zurich." I listened. Then I told him no. I told him I didn't build TerraVale to be a billboard for money that didn't care where it came from. He looked surprised, then annoyed, and then he smoothed his expression and said, "You've changed." I smiled. "No, you just didn't see me before." We finished our coffee in silence. Over the next month, things shifted in small, unexpected ways. Mateo stopped sending snide texts. Aunt Lucia commented proud of you on a TerraVale feature. Even Brielle messaged me asking for tips on reducing plastic in her new apartment. I didn't mistake politeness for transformation. I knew most of them were simply adjusting to the new information, trying to reposition themselves in proximity to what now seemed valuable. But I wasn't offended. I was finally free from chasing their approval, and that freedom gave me clarity. The real reward wasn't that they knew who I was now. It was that I no longer needed them to. The funny thing about truth is how quickly it changes the temperature in a room. Once my family realized who I really was, what I had built, and where I stood, they didn't apologize for the years of erasure. They just adjusted their posture. I saw it happen in real time. The shift wasn't in what they said, but in what they suddenly found worth their attention. TerraVale, which they once called Camila's eco-hobby, was now a fascinating topic at brunch. My clients were no longer startups they couldn't pronounce, but strategic players in a growing market. Even the word sustainability, which used to make Raphael laugh, now rolled off his tongue like a buzzword he planned to monetize. I watched it all unfold with quiet amusement and a growing sense of distance. The more they tried to pull me in, the more I understood I no longer needed to orbit their world. I was building something different, quieter, deeper, more honest. One afternoon, I got a call from Brielle, who asked if I'd be open to speaking at a private women's leadership lunch hosted by a luxury skincare brand she partnered with. She said they were desperate for a fresh face that wasn't just another finance executive or influencer. When I hesitated, she added, "Camila, they're obsessed with you right now. You're like the anti-status symbol everyone wants to be seen next to." I didn't know whether to be flattered or insulted. I said I'd think about it, then I didn't respond. A few days later, she sent me a video from the event. They'd replaced me with a fashion consultant who talked about shopping mindfully while wearing a $6,000 silk suit. It confirmed what I already knew. They didn't want substance. They wanted proximity to it, a kind of rented authenticity to add depth to their brand story. Even so, I wasn't bitter. I'd already spent too many years confusing being overlooked with being invisible. The truth was, I had never been invisible. They had just chosen not to see, and now that they did, they still didn't know what to do with it. Some tried to get closer. Mateo sent me a pitch deck for a green real estate startup with luxury eco-villas in Bali. He asked for an introduction to my investors. I told him, gently but clearly, that our values didn't align. He said I was being inflexible. I said I was being honest. He didn't reply. My father made his move next. He invited me to speak at a family foundation event. On paper, it looked generous, an opportunity to talk about environmental equity to a room full of donors and city officials. But when I reviewed the program, I saw his name listed as co-founder of a new green investment arm, one that hadn't existed before the dinner, one that positioned him as a longtime supporter of sustainability. I declined the invitation. He didn't take it well. He sent a short message. Thought you'd want to be part of something bigger. I didn't respond, because I already was. That week, something unexpected happened. My mother sent me a photo, not of herself, or Raphael, or some vacation. It was a picture of my grandmother Teresa standing in front of a newly planted lemon tree, holding a watering can, the caption said. She insisted on doing it herself, said you'd like that. I stared at the image for a long time. That small gesture, a lemon tree in her tiny backyard, meant more than any speech they could have given, because it wasn't performative, it wasn't curated, it was just real. That's when it clicked. I couldn't control how people showed up. I could only choose who I gave my energy to, and from that point on, I made a quiet decision. I would stop trying to fix the parts of my family that were broken and start nurturing the parts that had always shown care, even in small, quiet ways. The next morning, I called Grandma Teresa. We talked about lemon trees and recipes, and then she asked softly, "Do you think it's too late to learn what you do?" I smiled. It's never too late. She said she wanted to start composting, but wasn't sure how. I offered to send someone from my team to help her set it up. She refused. If I'm going to learn, I want to learn from you. That one call gave me more than 100 panel invitations ever could. It reminded me that change doesn't always need a stage. Sometimes it starts in the quiet corners of life, with people who don't need to understand your world perfectly to respect the way you walk through it. About a month after that strange Thanksgiving dinner, I received an email that stopped me mid-sip of coffee. It was from an editor at a national business magazine, one of those titles my father always left on the kitchen counter when he wanted to impress guests. The subject line was simple feature profile inquiry. I read it 3 times before clicking. The editor said she'd been following TerraVale's work for over a year, especially our policy contributions and community-based green infrastructure projects. She wanted to feature me in a cover story on under-the-radar female founders reshaping the sustainability space. I sat there for a few minutes, absorbing what that meant. I'd never courted publicity. I'd actively avoided it. But something about her message felt different, not exploitative, not shallow, just respectful and well-researched. I forwarded the email to Taylor. Her response was immediate. It's time. I didn't reply right away. I needed a walk. That afternoon, I took my usual trail up the bluffs, the one that overlooked the coastline and reminded me why I started TerraVale in the first place. It wasn't about being right or being praised. It was about building something that could outlive ego. But in that moment, I realized something else. Visibility isn't always vanity. Sometimes it's a tool, a responsibility. If the right people saw this work, maybe more doors would open for those trying to enter the same path. Maybe someone watching from their small apartment or crowded dorm room might realize you didn't have to be born into power to shift it. That thought made my decision clear. I told the editor, yes. The article came out 6 weeks later. It wasn't just a story about TerraVale's growth or my leadership style. It was about legacy, quiet power, and the difference between performative sustainability and the kind that quietly changes lives. They didn't Photoshop my photos. They didn't flatten my words. They let me tell the truth. The impact was immediate. Emails poured in, not from venture capitalists or politicians, but from students, teachers, climate activists, even a mother in Detroit who said her daughter was now applying to environmental science programs because she saw someone who looked like her in a leadership role. I read every message, slowly, gratefully, but not all responses were kind. My father called the day the article dropped. He didn't congratulate me. He asked why he wasn't mentioned, said it would have looked better if the family foundation had been included. I told him this story wasn't about optics, he said. You're welcome for the villa that raised you. I let the silence answer for me. My mother sent a vague text. Nice piece. Some of your quotes were bold. Raphael sent nothing. But something else happened that I didn't expect. My inbox pinged with a message from a girl named Paloma, 16 years old, public school, first-generation student. She had seen the article and said she wanted to build a company like mine someday, but didn't know where to start. Her message reminded me of a version of myself I hadn't spoken to in a long time. I wrote back immediately, invited her to apply for our youth mentorship cohort. Then I asked Taylor to create a special track for high schoolers outside of traditional privilege. Paloma became our pilot mentee. Her voice, her hunger to learn, reminded me that the point of all this wasn't just building a company. It was making sure the door stayed open behind me. Visibility brought new pressure too. Speaking invitations, board offers, articles that tried to spin the narrative into something more palatable. One PR agency even offered to soften the edges of my image to make me more brand friendly. I declined politely. I wasn't interested in being marketable. I was interested in being useful. Still, I knew what this moment meant. I couldn't retreat now. I had a seat at the table, but I wasn't there to impress the guests. I was there to rewrite the menu. One morning, as I walked into a partners summit at a downtown hotel, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass doors. I didn't look rich. I didn't look radical. I looked like someone who knew who she was. And that, I realized, was more powerful than anything I could wear or drive, because quiet power doesn't ask for attention. It changes the air when it walks into a room. The article had barely been out for 2 weeks when I got a message from Raphael. Short, vague. We should catch up. Got an idea I think you'll love. I stared at it for a moment. Not surprised, just disappointed. It always starts this way. They dismiss you until they need you. Then they reappear with curiosity disguised as collaboration. I agreed to meet. Not because I expected something worthwhile, but because sometimes it's important to see patterns clearly before choosing how to respond. We met at a rooftop cafe overlooking the marina, the kind of place Raphael loved to frequent, where the view mattered more than the menu, and everyone looked like they were posing for a soft launch. He arrived in a crisp linen shirt and loafers without socks. Still the image of success he'd curated so carefully after a round of shallow pleasantries. He leaned in and launched into his pitch. He wanted to create a fund, not just any fund, he said. A next-gen impact vehicle targeting conscious capital with ESG overlays and climate-forward narratives. It was the kind of language meant to impress rooms that don't ask follow-up questions. He named celebrities he hoped to loop in, brands he thought could ride the wave. I let him speak. 15 minutes of buzzwords stacked on borrowed concepts. Then he said it. With your credibility, we'd have instant traction. You'd be the ethical face. I'd handle the numbers. I looked at him for a long second, not angry, just tired. So you want me to put my name, my work, my principles behind something you haven't built, just so you can attract funding that doesn't care if anything changes as long as it sounds green. He blinked. That's a little harsh. It's strategic. Everyone's doing it. You don't have to run it. Just lend the brand. Lend the story. I set down my glass. Raphael, my story isn't for rent. And TerraVale isn't a costume you wear to get into rooms. If you want to build something that matters, do the work. If you want to look like someone who does, I'm not interested. He looked genuinely stunned, like the idea of being told no hadn't crossed his mind. You'd really walk away from an opportunity like this? I smiled. I've walked away from bigger things, like trying to make this family understand who I was before a magazine did it for me. He leaned back, his expression tightening. You've changed. I kept eye contact. No, you're just noticing. That conversation confirmed everything I'd already begun to understand. Success doesn't just change how others treat you. It reveals who only treated you with kindness because they thought you had nothing to offer. The moment you become useful, their tone shifts, their language changes, and if you're not careful, their needs become your distraction. I wasn't going to let that happen. A few days later, Mateo reached out again. This time, it was more desperate. He had apparently pitched his Bali eco-villa idea to a group of angel investors and gotten shut down. He wanted to know if I could review the deck and maybe soften the message so it felt more authentic. He ended his voice note with, "You have a way of making things sound like they matter." It wasn't a compliment. It was an admission. He knew what he was doing didn't matter. He just wanted it to look like it did. That night, I sat at home, reading through emails from our mentees at TerraVale. Paloma had just submitted her first report on coastal erosion in underserved communities and proposed a public education initiative through TikTok micro-content. Another student had built a basic carbon tracking dashboard using open source code. These were the ideas I wanted to amplify. Not vanity projects from people who laughed at compost bins 5 years ago, but now wanted to trademark green guilt. A week later, I held a round table with our community leaders and grassroots partners. We weren't seated in a luxury boardroom. We were in a modest co-working space with whiteboards and folding chairs. But the ideas were strong. The energy was real. The impact was measurable. We discussed how to fund solar access in low-income areas without letting developers hijack the narrative. We brainstormed how to bring in high schoolers to shadow on climate research trips. Every voice at that table mattered. No one interrupted. No one postured. No one asked for headlines. That was the room I had been building toward all along. That evening, I opened a message from a journalist who wanted to follow up on the profile with a podcast segment. I said yes, this time. I wanted to speak openly, not just about the business, but about the psychology of being underestimated, about what happens when the world finally notices, but you no longer need its permission. The recording was scheduled for next week. The title she proposed made me pause for a second, then smile. It read, "She wasn't quiet. You just weren't listening." The podcast episode aired on a Thursday morning. I didn't promote it, didn't send out any press releases, didn't text it to anyone in my family, but it spread fast. The title alone caught attention. She wasn't quiet. You just weren't listening. In the first few hours, I received messages from college students, mid-career professionals, nonprofit leaders, even a few stay-at-home parents who said they'd never heard someone describe that exact feeling before. The quiet erasure, the subtle dismissal, the years of being told you weren't enough while silently building something that outgrew every room that overlooked you. I didn't tell them what to do. I didn't preach. I just told the truth about how it felt to spend your life proving things no one asked to see, only to discover that proving it isn't the real win. Knowing it for yourself is. The conversation touched something deeper than I expected. It became one of their most replayed segments that quarter, and quietly, without fanfare, it did something else. It closed a chapter. Later that week, I received a call from the coordinator of a climate policy summit hosted in Geneva. It wasn't just a panel spot this time. They wanted me to keynote, not because of the article, not because of the podcast, because someone in their team had watched TerraVale's pilot project in New Orleans, where we helped convert an abandoned lot into a solar-powered community hub in partnership with local teens. They said it was the first time they'd seen tech, trust, and equity intersect so clearly on the ground. I accepted the invitation, not to prove anything, but because it aligned with why I started in the first place. Change, to me, has always meant systems and stories coming together. The night before my flight, I received a dinner invitation from my parents. No specific reason, no family gathering, just a quiet line from my mother. We'd like to see you. Just us. I debated whether to go, not because I was angry, that part had passed, but because I knew the dynamic would never return to what it once was. I didn't need their pride, and I didn't crave their approval, but I was curious if they were finally capable of something resembling honesty. I arrived in my usual way, same car, same clothes, same pace. When I walked into the house, I noticed something different. No grand table, no catered spread, just a simple home-cooked dinner already plated, as if they wanted to remove the performance from the moment. We ate slowly. My father asked about my next projects, but not like a man fishing for talking points. My mother listened, hands folded, only speaking to ask about the neighborhoods TerraVale had chosen to support. It wasn't a transformation, but it was unfamiliar in a way that felt strangely peaceful. At the end of dinner, my father stood up and left the room. When he returned, he was holding a thick envelope. He placed it on the table. "It's not an offer," he said. "It's just everything I didn't say before, about how wrong we were, about how little we saw. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. What mattered was that he handed it to me without expectation, not as leverage, not as currency, just acknowledgement." Before I left, my mother followed me to the door and said something I never thought I'd hear. "I used to think the loudest person in the room was the most powerful, but you've taught me different." I didn't respond right away. I just nodded, then said, "It's not about being loud. It's about knowing what's worth saying." That was enough. On the flight to Geneva, I reviewed my speech notes, adjusting only one paragraph. I added a sentence that had been echoing in my mind since that dinner, one that I hadn't dared say out loud before. Sometimes the greatest proof of strength is not who believes in you, but how little it matters once you believe in yourself. That night, somewhere over the Atlantic, I realized something. I wasn't just moving toward a keynote or a headline. I was stepping fully into my own name, the name they once pitied, the one they laughed at during dinner, the one that now stood on its own, not because it needed to rise above anyone, but because it no longer had to explain why it belonged. The summit in Geneva wasn't glamorous, despite what most people assumed. It wasn't a red carpet event or a networking showcase dressed in cocktail lighting. It was early mornings, hard questions, and policy tables filled with people who actually cared about what would be true in 20 years, not just what would trend next quarter. I arrived with no entourage, no publicist, and no need to impress anyone. Taylor had offered to fly out, but I told her to stay and hold down the office. She smiled and said, "Text me when you're done making global leaders uncomfortable with your calm facts." The opening night was simple, just a dinner with other keynote speakers. I sat next to a woman from Kenya who had built solar-powered irrigation systems in regions where drought used to mean permanent displacement. We talked about land, legacy, and what it meant to carry the weight of visibility when you never asked to be the face of anything. It felt more like sisterhood than strategy. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to explain why I belonged at the table. I just was. My keynote was scheduled for the second day. No fanfare, just a 30-minute block between policy panels. I stepped onto the stage with my notes in one hand, but I didn't read from them. I spoke about TerraVale, about quiet innovation, about how environmental justice isn't a trend, but a long road walked by people who don't make headlines. I told the story of Paloma and the coding dashboard she built, of the New Orleans solar hub, of how change doesn't need permission to matter. I ended with one line, not rehearsed but real. If you wait for the world to validate your work before you believe in it, you'll never finish what matters. The room was still, not in awe, but in attention, and that's what I valued most. Real attention is rare, especially when you've spent your life being told you were too quiet to be heard. Later that afternoon, a woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She said she used to hide her job title in social circles because people didn't take environmental planning seriously. But after hearing me speak, she planned to own it. Fully, I told her, the only thing louder than your job title is the impact you build with it. We exchanged cards. It wasn't about business. It was about solidarity. Back home, things had shifted again. Raphael had stopped sending proposals. Mateo had gone quiet. My parents reached out less, but when they did, it felt less coded. Grandma Teresa called to ask how Geneva went. I told her everything. She said, "You always did make noise without yelling." I just didn't know how to hear it back then. That sentence meant more to me than every panel invite I'd ever received, because it came without strategy, just truth. I returned to the TerraVale office that following Monday and was greeted by a team that didn't need a press release to care. They just asked how the trip went, then went right back to problem solving. That's the kind of culture we had built. No one needed to perform. Everyone just did the work. That afternoon, I visited our intern cohort. Paloma stood at the front of the group, walking them through her student mentorship app prototype. She'd added a peer feedback loop I hadn't even considered. I stood at the back, watching her lead. It was the clearest moment of full circle I'd experienced. Because legacy isn't about having your name printed. It's about watching someone else step forward more confidently because you made space when no one else did. That night, I sat at home, sipping tea, reading a letter from a student in Brazil who had been following TerraVale since the podcast. She said her father thought she was wasting time studying sustainability, but that after listening to my story, she'd decided to keep going anyway. Her words were strong, defiant. She ended with, "Even if no one around me believes in what I see, I'll keep building it anyway." I looked out the window, the city quiet, the sky just beginning to soften, and thought this is the real return. Not applause, not validation, but knowing you helped shift even one person out of silence. That's when you know you've made noise that matters. 3 months after Geneva, I received a formal invitation to attend my cousin Mateo's engagement party. It was to be held at the same family villa where the Thanksgiving dinner had unfolded, the one where my success was once laughed at in passing while dessert was being served. The card was printed on textured ivory paper, embossed in gold, and signed by both families. It included a dress code, valet instructions, and a reminder that press and photos will be limited to preserve privacy. I put the card aside and didn't think much of it. Then my mother called. She asked if I would be attending. Her voice careful, casual, almost rehearsed. When I didn't answer right away, she added softly, "It would mean something to the family." That was when I realized This wasn't just a party. This was another stage, another chance for people to reposition themselves, to rewrite who they had supported, and when. I said I'd let her know. I didn't owe anyone an appearance. But part of me wondered if showing up not to prove, but to exist fully and quietly in my own truth might be the real closure. I arrived exactly on time. No earlier, no later. Same car, same energy. I wore a black silk jumpsuit I had purchased from a local designer who used only recycled materials. No logos, no labels, just structure and intention. The valet greeted me by name, not because he knew who I was, but because I had once helped his sister find an internship through TerraVale's community board. As I walked through the front gate, I noticed the usual suspects scattered around the lawn, clusters of high heels, polished laughs, champagne flutes filled with more ego than liquid. But this time, something was different. People looked up, not with confusion or surprise, but with recognition. Not everyone. Of course, some still narrowed their eyes, trying to match the Camila from years ago, with the Camila now calmly walking across grass in flat shoes. Mateo spotted me from across the yard and raised his glass with a practiced grin. I raised mine back without stepping closer. Inside, I found my grandmother seated near the window, a lemon-themed scarf wrapped around her shoulders. She patted the seat next to her. I was wondering if you'd come. I smiled. I almost didn't. She leaned in. But you did. That's the difference now. You choose. She didn't say it like a lesson. She said it like a mirror. At one point, Raphael walked over. He looked older, or maybe just less polished. He nodded. Didn't expect to see you here, I replied. That makes two of us. He didn't pitch anything, didn't ask for funding, just said, you really did it. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to remind him that I'd already done it long before he noticed. I just said, yeah, I did, and we let that be enough. As the evening stretched, I was introduced to a few strangers, some of whom had read the article or heard the podcast and came up to say how much it meant to them. I thanked them sincerely, but didn't stay long in any circle. I wasn't there to bask in attention. I was there to close a loop. When the music started and the crowd moved toward the dance area, I stepped outside onto the balcony that overlooked the garden. From there, I could see everything and feel nothing tugging at me. No tension, no need to defend, no hunger for recognition, just presence. I stayed there until the sky turned a soft shade of evening gray. Then I made my way toward the exit. As I passed through the front hall, my mother caught up with me. She didn't say much, just rested her hand briefly on mine and said, I'm glad you came, for once. I believed her, not because it was perfect, not because the past had disappeared, but because, for the first time in our lives, the silence between us wasn't full of judgment or unmet expectation. It was just still, and that, in itself, was peace. That night, I drove home with the windows down. No music, just the sound of the road and the feeling of something old finally releasing its grip. I pulled into my driveway, walked inside, and sat at the kitchen table where I had written my first TerraVale proposal all those years ago. I poured myself a glass of water, pulled out my notebook, and made a list of the next 5 people I wanted to mentor. None of them would know about this party. None of them would care. And that's why they were exactly the right people. Because the real power wasn't in showing up for a family that had finally learned how to tolerate me. It was in showing up, quietly and consistently, for a world that had always needed someone like me to speak not louder, but clearer. And now, no one could say they hadn't heard.